Imagine this. It's 1879, and two broke miners are trudging through the dusty hills of New Mexico, chasing nothing but whispers and legends. They're dead broke. They've failed spectacularly in Colorado's silver boom. And they're about to stumble onto something that will trigger one of the most explosive gold rushes the Southwest has ever seen. A stampede so violent, so sudden, that within months, a tent city will transform into a roaring metropolis of 2,500 fortune seekers. This is the story of Cerrillos, New Mexico, the gold rush that history almost forgot. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the lost gold legends and gold mining history of this iconic region. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Most people have heard of California's gold rush. They know about the Klondike. But hidden in the hills just 25 miles southwest of Santa Fe lies a ghost of a boom town that once rivaled them all. And its story begins not with discovery, but with desperation. Frank Dimmitt and Robert Hart were nobody special. Dimmitt was American, Hart was English, and both were what you might call professionally unsuccessful miners. They'd tried their luck in Leadville, Colorado, one of the richest mining districts in American history, and had come up empty-handed, completely broke. But these men had heard the stories, ancient legends whispered by locals about the Cerrillos Hills, tales that stretched back centuries before any white prospector ever set foot in the territory. The Spanish had known about these hills. For generations, they'd enslaved indigenous peoples to tear turquoise and silver from places with names like Mount Chalchihuitl and Mina del Tierra, the mine of the earth itself. The legend spoke of unimaginable wealth, of veins of precious metal so rich that Spanish conquistadors had gorged themselves on the plunder for decades. But by 1879, those mines were considered played out, forgotten, relegated to campfire stories. Dimmitt and Hart didn't care about history. They cared about survival. And so, in 1879, with nothing to lose and everything to gain, these two empty-handed dreamers headed south from Leadville into New Mexico territory to see if the legends held any truth. What happened next changed everything. The two prospectors surveyed the Cerrillos Hills methodically, hammering away at rock faces, collecting samples, stuffing their saddlebags with ore specimens. When they finally made the long journey back to Leadville, they carried with them something more valuable than gold itself: proof. They submitted their collection to the assay offices, and when those results came back, the mining community absolutely exploded with excitement. The ore wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. High-grade deposits of gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc. A mineral cocktail so rich that every prospector who heard about it immediately understood what it meant. Dimmitt and Hart had rediscovered one of the most valuable mineral deposits in the entire Southwest. The stampede was inevitable. Word spread through Leadville like wildfire, and miners who'd spent years scratching out meager livings in Colorado suddenly saw their second chance. The rush to Cerrillos began almost overnight. By the time the dust settled, hundreds of miners had descended on the Cerrillos Hills. The initial wave erected a sprawling tent city that sprang up seemingly overnight. But as the gold continued to pour out of the earth, something unexpected happened. The tent city began to solidify. Permanent structures replaced canvas. Streets emerged. Businesses opened. What had started as a desperate gamble by two broke prospectors had transformed into a legitimate town, Cerrillos, Spanish for Little Hills. And it wasn't just Cerrillos. The strike was so massive that satellite communities sprouted up almost simultaneously, towns with names that captured the fever dream optimism of the era: Carbonateville, Bonanza City. each one filled with men willing to risk everything for a chance at striking it rich. By midsummer of 1879, just months after Dimmitt and Hart's discovery, 300 miners were actively working the hills, gouging out gold, silver, and copper from the earth in a frenzy of extraction. And then came another discovery that would cement Cerrillos' importance: coal. Rich coal deposits along the Galisteo River meant that Cerrillos not only produced precious metals, but also had the fuel to power the smelters that would process them. It was a prospector's dream scenario. The transformation accelerated when the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway announced it would lay tracks directly through Cerrillos in 1880. This was the seal of legitimacy. Railroads didn't invest in flash-in-the-pan mining camps. They invested in the future. The railroad brought more than just transportation. It brought opportunity. When construction crews arrived to lay track, they found a town still figuring out how to accommodate its exploding population. 6 railroad workers and their foreman had nowhere to eat, nowhere to sleep. A woman named Mrs. Harkness, whose husband was off prospecting, made a generous offer. She'd put them all up in her home. When her husband, D.D. Harkness, returned from his expedition, he found himself accidentally in the hotel business. And business was booming. The Harknesses eventually built an 18-room hotel called the Cerrillos House, transforming their charitable gesture into one of the town's most successful enterprises. But with rapid growth came chaos. Cerrillos in the early 1880s was a rough place, filled with rough men far from civilization's restraining influences. The righteous citizens of the town had zero tolerance for disorder, and in January 1882, that intolerance manifested in one of the most brutal acts of frontier justice the town would ever witness. A man laying water pipes to the railroad station, described only as being of questionable character, took offense at some slight from a co-worker. Recognizing he couldn't win a fair fight, he hatched a cowardly plan. He exploited his victim's weakness for liquor, got the man catastrophically drunk, and then savagely beat him nearly to death while the poor soul was too intoxicated to defend himself. The community's response was swift and merciless. The perpetrator was arrested, but the citizens of Cerrillos decided official justice wasn't enough. An angry mob stormed the saloon where the prisoner was being held, overpowered the guards, and dragged the man to a slaughterhouse. They stripped him, tied him to a wall, and flogged him with such brutality that flesh tore from his back and blood streamed down his body. When they finally cut him down, they threw a blanket over his mangled back and told him to get out of Cerrillos and never come back. He left immediately. No one ever saw him again. This was frontier justice in its rawest form, violent, immediate, and absolutely effective. Cerrillos would tolerate gold fever, but it wouldn't tolerate cowardice and cruelty. Through the 1880s and 1890s, Cerrillos experienced the typical boom and bust cycles of a mining town, but its peak was genuinely impressive. At its height, the population swelled to 2,500 people, a remarkable number for a remote New Mexico mining camp. By 1897, the town boasted 2 churches, a public school with 130 students, 3 hotels, multiple general stores, Wells Fargo Express, Western Union Telegraph, and a population that had stabilized around 800 permanent residents. This wasn't just a mining camp anymore. This was a real town, with families, infrastructure, and aspirations beyond simply extracting wealth from the earth. Cerrillos became the supply and shipping hub for the entire region, supporting nearby mining towns like Golden, San Pedro, and Dolores, as well as the coal camps of Madrid and Waldo. The railroad connection made it indispensable. Gold, silver, copper, coal, all of it flowed through Cerrillos on its way to markets across the country. One of the town's most elegant buildings was the Palace Hotel, built by Richard Green, a Texan who'd relocated to New Mexico with his wife and numerous children during the boom. The hotel featured a dozen rooms, including a bridal suite in its stone section, with an adobe addition built 2 years later to house a dining room. The building served multiple purposes over the years, housing a tailor shop, a doctor's office, a dentist's office, and even serving as a meeting place for the Masonic Lodge. When Green died in his own hotel in 1906, his widow sold the property and moved to California. Because that's what eventually happened to Cerrillos. The gold played out. The easily accessible ore was exhausted. The miners moved on to the next strike, the next promise of fortune. By the mid-20th century, mining was no longer important to Cerrillos. The population had dwindled to just 50 families. But the town didn't die. Instead, it transformed. Cerrillos reinvented itself as a tourist attraction, trading on its authentic Old West charm. The buildings from the boom era still stood, weathered but proud, offering visitors a genuine glimpse into frontier mining life. And in a delightful twist of fate, the town caught the eye of none other than Walt Disney himself. Captivated by Cerrillos' authentic charm, Disney used the main street as the backdrop for his El Fuego Baca television series, disguising the town as the fictional Frisco. Even today, those production signs are still faintly visible on the buildings, a Hollywood footnote to a gold rush story. Cerrillos stands today as a reminder that the American gold rush wasn't just California in 1849. It was dozens of strikes, hundreds of boom towns, thousands of desperate men willing to risk everything for a chance at fortune. Most failed. Some succeeded beyond imagination. And a few, like Cerrillos, left behind something more valuable than gold, a living testament to an era when the American West was still being written, one strike at a time. Imagine this, a 67-year-old Methodist preacher, snowshoes strapped to his feet, trudging through waist-deep snow in the Colorado Rockies. He's carrying mail on his back, searching for souls to save and silver veins to stake. Most men his age would be sitting by a warm fire, but Father John Dyer wasn't most men. And in the spring of 1880, this aging circuit rider would stumble into a discovery that would birth an entire mining town and net him the equivalent of hundreds of thousands in today's dollars. This is the story of how a man of God became a man of gold. The year is 1859, and John Dyer has just done something absolutely insane. The 57-year-old preacher has walked, not ridden, not taken a wagon, but walked from Omaha, Nebraska, to Denver, Colorado, hundreds of miles on foot. Why? Because during the Great Pikes Peak Gold Rush, Dyer saw something nobody else did. While thousands rushed west dreaming of nuggets and fortune, Dyer saw lost souls. Miners needed salvation as much as they needed gold, maybe more. But here's where it gets interesting. Father Dyer quickly realized that saving souls in the mining camps didn't pay the bills. The offering plate contributions from a bunch of broke prospectors barely covered beans and coffee. So Dyer did what any practical frontier preacher would do. He got a second job, as a mail carrier. Every single week, this man walked from Denver to a remote mining camp called Buckskin Joe, 2.5 days each way. 5 days round trip. He did this to save the $10 stagecoach fare, carrying letters on his back and sermons in his heart. Think about that for a moment. While other preachers were building comfortable congregations in settled towns, Dyer was literally walking through mountain blizzards on snowshoes, delivering mail and the word of God to some of the roughest characters in the American West. He preached in saloons. He preached in gambling halls. He preached wherever men would listen, and they loved him for it. Methodist by denomination, but universally called Father Dyer, a Catholic honorific that transcended denominational boundaries. But the gold story really begins in 1879. By now, Dyer is 67 years old. Most men would be thinking about retirement, maybe a comfortable rocking chair. Not Dyer. He's been granted what's called a superannuate leave, basically semi-retirement, and decides to settle permanently in Breckenridge with his wife. The timing seems perfect. Summit County is experiencing another mining boom. Prospectors are flooding in. Town lots are selling fast. The mountains are alive with the sound of picks hitting rock and dreams being born. Then, boom! Within a year, it all collapses. The mining boom fizzles. A fire sweeps through town. Real estate values plummet. The Methodist Conference can't offer Dyer any financial support. So here's this nearly 70-year-old retired preacher stuck in a declining mining town with no income. What does he do? He becomes a professional prospector. See, Dyer had spent decades walking these mountains. He knew every gulch, every stream, every promising rock formation. Winter didn't stop him. He'd strap on snowshoes and head into the high country when the snow was so deep that nobody else dared venture out. He became a claim locator, helping young prospectors find promising ground. And he was good at it. Really good. His autobiography mentions he was paid rather well for his services. The old preacher had found a way to turn his intimate knowledge of God's creation into cold, hard cash. Now we come to 1880. Two young men named Candle and Thompson are boarding with the Dyers. They're broke, desperate. They've got maybe enough money to cover their room and board for a few more days, and then they'll have to leave Summit County empty-handed, another pair of failed 49ers with nothing but disappointment to show for their dreams. They ask Father Dyer for help. The old preacher looks at these two struggling young men and sees something worth investing in. Maybe he sees himself decades earlier, full of hope and determination. Maybe he just likes them. Whatever the reason, Dyer agrees to take them prospecting. In the spring, through waist-deep snow, up a mountain. Picture this scene. 3 men breaking trail through massive snowdrifts, carrying picks, shovels, tents, and blankets. The 2 young guys are gasping, struggling with the altitude and the brutal physical demands. And there's Father Dyer, nearly 70 years old, practically skipping along, thriving in conditions that would kill lesser men. They're so exhausted that first night, they actually sleep in a 3-foot prospect hole they've dug, just to get some shelter from the mountain cold. The next day, they cut trees and build a rough log pen, just tall enough to stand in. From this primitive base camp, they start digging, and they find color. Not much, just about $3 a day per man, but it's enough. It's hope in physical form. Dyer stakes a joint claim with the 2 boarders, but they also keep prospecting independently. The summer passes with modest success. Then Thompson, one of the boarders, notices something. Float samples, pieces of ore that have broken off from a larger source and tumbled downhill. Any experienced prospector knows what this means. Follow the float back up the mountain, and you'll find the mother lode. Thompson does exactly that. He traces the float samples upward until he reaches the source. He sinks a 10-foot hole, and then, jackpot. He throws out over 100 pounds of rich gray copper ore worth about $500 per ton. In 1880 dollars, he's literally struck it rich. But here's where inexperience almost costs Thompson everything. He doesn't realize what he's found. He sells a quarter interest in his claim to a man named Parkinson for a measly $100. He's about to sell the rest for just $250 when the buyer fails to show up with the money. That no-show might have been the luckiest thing that ever happened to Thompson. Meanwhile, Father Dyer is getting suspicious. Something about Thompson's secret new claim location sounds familiar, very familiar. Dyer thinks it might be on ground he'd staked 3 years earlier, marked only with a shovel left behind to hold his tract. The 2 men compare notes and immediately head up the mountain to check. They find Dyer's shovel. They find his old corner stake. But here's the beautiful twist. The claims don't overlap. They're adjacent, and even better, there's vacant ground on both sides of Thompson's strike. Father Dyer, with the decisive speed of a man who's seen too many opportunities vanish in the mountains, immediately stakes 5 more claims, 1 to the south and 4 to the north of Thompson's discovery. The aging preacher has just secured what could be a fortune. Now Dyer takes some ore samples to town for assaying. The assayer gets excited, really excited. He starts asking where the samples came from, but Dyer is old, tired, and frankly more interested in building churches than mining hard rock. So he cuts a deal. The assayer can have an interest in the property in exchange for doing all the actual mining work. Here's where the Dyers show their character. They hear that Thompson is about to sell his claim for $250. They call him to their home. Mrs. Dyer sits him down and gives him advice that changes his life. Ask for more. Ask for $1,000. Thompson does exactly that. The buyers accept. He gets $100 down, the first time in his entire life he's seen that much money at once. The deal closes. Thompson has turned poverty into prosperity on the advice of a preacher and his wife who could have stayed silent and profited from his ignorance. The claims get merged. The Warriors Mark mine is established about half a mile above a growing cluster of cabins by the creek. The settlement takes on a name, Dyersville. Father Dyer builds himself a 17 by 17-foot log cabin, cutting and hauling the timber himself in January 1881. He's now 70 years old, living in a town named after him, with a financial stake in what's about to become a very productive mine. Summer comes and the Warriors Mark roars to life. 50 men working under a superintendent. In just 6 months, they pull out $75,000 to $80,000 worth of ore. $3 million in stock gets sold. The mine pays 1 dividend. Father Dyer receives $10,000 in stock for his interest. But Dyer isn't naive. He's seen too many mining booms and busts. He writes cynically about mining stocks, noting they're usually issued at 3 times their actual worth. He catalogs all the ways mines get bled dry. Directors, clerks, presidents, treasurers, bosses, and superintendents all drawing salaries. Add in mismanagement, insider dealing, whiskey, gambling, and prostitutes, and it's a wonder any mine ever shows a profit. His cynicism proves warranted. A lawsuit over fraudulent assays damages confidence in the Warriors Mark. The mine eventually gets leased to an operator who controls most of the stock. And then, as happens to so many Colorado mining towns, the vein pinches out, the ore disappears, the workers leave, the town empties, Dyersville becomes a ghost town. But Father Dyer, he outlasts his town by years. The man who walked from Omaha to Denver, who carried mail through blizzards, who preached in saloons and staked claims in his 60s, lives to the ripe old age of 89. He dies in 1901, having witnessed the entire arc of the Colorado mining frontier, from boom to bust, from tent camps to ghost towns. From his $2,000 profit on the Warriors Mark, about 20% of his stock's face value, Dyer proved his theory correct. Most mining stock was worthless, but he'd made enough. Combined with his claim locating fees, his mail-carrying wages, and his modest preaching income, the old circuit rider had cobbled together a decent living from the mountains he loved. Today, you can still visit Dyersville. The town site sits in a remote gulch accessible only by 4-wheel drive vehicles or a difficult hike. Father Dyer's cabin stands roofless, logs weathered by more than a century of mountain storms. The Warriors Mark mine is just a large dump with dangerous holes. The creek still flows past the handful of remaining structures. Imagine this. You're standing in a wooden sluice box watching water drain away, and suddenly you see it. Gold so thick, so concentrated that it looks like pudding. Yellow, glittering pudding. And it's yours. Well, it was yours until a sheriff's posse showed up to steal it. What do? If you're Charles Ferguson in 1850s Nevada City, you grab that 100-pound long tom with superhuman strength and run. Welcome to the story of Nevada City, California, where fortunes were made in a single day, where men shot candle wicks to prove their aim, and where the gold was so plentiful that miners literally couldn't believe what they were seeing. In 1848, when James Marshall first prospected the hills of what would become Nevada City, he couldn't have imagined what was about to unfold. Within just a few years, this remote spot in the Sierra Nevada would explode into California's third largest city, trailing only San Francisco and Sacramento. 10,000 souls descended on these hills, all chasing the same dream: gold. But Nevada City wasn't like other mining camps. While most 49ers were bent over rivers, swirling pans in freezing water, Nevada City's miners had discovered something different: ancient river deposits that held concentrations of gold that seemed almost impossible. They called their technique coyote hole mining, digging small shafts into these prehistoric riverbeds, and the returns were staggering. $6,000 in a single day wasn't uncommon. To put that in perspective, that's well over $100,000 in today's money, earned in one day by one man. The gold rush transformed reasonable men into obsessed treasure hunters. In Nevada City's main street, a group of miners literally started digging a shaft right in the middle of the thoroughfare. When a local storekeeper told them to stop, they laughed. There was no law against it, they said. The merchant's response was pure frontier logic. Then I'll make a law. He drew his revolver, and suddenly, everyone agreed that mining in the main street was, indeed, illegal. This was Nevada City, where laws were made at gunpoint and boundaries were determined by how far a rifle could shoot. One pioneer, when asked about his claim's extent, simply pointed to his weapon leaning against a tree and drawled, "Just as far as that rifle carries up and down this ravine, I claim, and no further." Nobody argued. But the real madness began in October 1850, when the massive quartz discovery at neighboring Grass Valley changed everything. Suddenly, Nevada City's hard rock ledges, which miners had literally laughed at just months before, became the most valuable real estate in California. The men who'd been mocked for digging up rock were now sitting on fortunes. Charles Ferguson learned this the hard way. He and his partner had staked a promising claim and worked it briefly before heading out on a supply run. When they returned, two claim jumpers had seized their property and weren't interested in discussing ownership. Ferguson did what any self-respecting miner would do. He ignored them and started sinking a shaft anyway. The jumpers sued. Somehow, impossibly, they won. When the sheriff's posse arrived to enforce the court's decision, Ferguson and his partner were running ore through their long tom, watching the gold separate from worthless rock. Ferguson tried to stall, arguing with the lawmen, but they weren't having it. They shut off his water and picked up his long tom. That's when Ferguson saw it. As the water drained away, the sluice box revealed a sight that would haunt his dreams forever: gold so thick it resembled yellow pudding. The concentration was unlike anything he'd seen. Adrenaline surged through his veins, giving him what he later described as superhuman strength. He grabbed that long tom, a device that normally required two men to lift, and carried it bodily 50 yards away. Working frantically, he scooped the richest portion into a tin dish and sank it out of sight in a pool of water. He was still panning out the rest when one of the claim jumpers walked up and saw what remained. The jumper's face fell. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this disappointing residue. Discouraged, he sold the entire claim for a mere $100. The buyer? He promptly sold it back to Ferguson. Stories like Ferguson's spread like wildfire, drawing thousands more fortune seekers. By 1851, Nevada City was a chaotic boomtown of 250 buildings, frame houses, canvas tents, and log cabins sprawled along a ravine bottom. The town was bursting at the seams, and the 4-mile road connecting it to Grass Valley became the most traveled stretch in California, choked with ox teams, mule trains, stagecoaches, and cattle herds kicking up perpetual clouds of dust. The staging operations out of Sacramento were pure pandemonium. Imagine a street jammed with dozens of coaches, hundreds of horses, mountains of baggage, and aggressive runners, literally grabbing prospective passengers and shoving them toward their company's stage. "All aboard for Nevada City," they'd shout. "Only 3 seats left. Last chance today. Take you there in 5 hours." One traveler described being physically seized by a runner who began pushing him onto the Nevada City coach. When he finally managed to protest that he wanted to go to Coloma, not Nevada City, the runner didn't let go. Instead, he held tight and shouted for a colleague, "Oh, Bill, here's a man for Coloma." The system required nearly as many runners as passengers, and the real danger wasn't being left behind. It was ending up on the wrong stage entirely. But if you made it to Nevada City with gold in your possession, your troubles were just beginning. The 4-mile stretch between Nevada City and Grass Valley became notorious for road agents. In May 1858, 5 bandits stopped the Auburn stage just outside town. Passengers braced for robbery, especially the Nevada City bank messenger carrying a substantial load of gold dust. He drew his pistol, but one of the robbers calmly told him to be careful. What happened next was pure genius. The messenger suddenly relaxed and agreed there was really nothing to fight about. All the real treasure, he explained, was in a Wells Fargo chest on the next stage. The bandits conducted a quick search, believed him, and let the stage pass. They then robbed the second stage of $21,000. The clever bank agent felt a twinge of guilt about Wells Fargo's loss, but as he reasoned, business was business. The robbery game reached its peak in the mid-1860s with a bandit known as Jack Williams. He started small, stopping lone travelers on the road from You Bet to Nevada City, 6 men in a single night on one occasion. But Williams was ambitious. In May 1866, his gang stopped the North San Juan stage and robbed 2 Chinese passengers. Then they turned to the Wells Fargo box and hit a problem, an inner chest made of chilled iron that they couldn't crack. The stage rolled on, Wells Fargo triumphant. Jack Williams wasn't the type to give up. Days later, his gang stopped another stage, this time equipped with 2 sledgehammers, a crowbar, a portable blacksmith's kit, and giant powder, explosives. They told the terrified passengers they'd get that gold or blast the entire coach into the Yuba River. True to their word, the second explosion blew the chest open. Williams hoisted the gold over his shoulder, passed around a flask of brandy as a courtesy to the passengers, and disappeared into the wilderness. Nevada City had dealt with plenty of rough characters, but this brazenness was too much. A 6-man posse rode out under the county sheriff. Strangely, 5 of them abandoned the pursuit, leaving only Deputy Steve Vennard to continue alone with his 15-shot Henry rifle. Vennard crossed the South Yuba and suddenly found himself face-to-face with the 3 outlaws. 2 were already aiming at him when he opened fire. His first shot struck Jack Williams in the heart. His second shot pierced another bandit's head. His fourth shot dropped the last man. 3 bandits, 4 shots, all dead. By early afternoon, the gold was back with Wells Fargo, and Nevada City's honor was restored. For all its violence and chaos, Nevada City maintained an odd civility. When families began arriving in 1851, particularly respectable women, the miners transformed almost overnight. These men, comfortable around saloon girls, treated virtuous women with near reverence. Every miner considered himself a sworn guardian, and any dishonorable word or action toward a proper woman would result in punishment and offender, would remember so long as he lived, if, perchance, he survived the chastisement. The town even boasted culture. A barn-like theater on Main Street became the first playhouse in the Sierras, where Edwin Booth performed and audiences hooted, yelled, whistled, and stamped their feet through productions of Richard III. When disputes arose, gentlemen often settled them through dueling rather than brawling, though not always with tragic results. Two rival doctors once fired 5 shots each in a saloon, sent everyone diving for cover, satisfied their honor without landing a single hit, and celebrated with drinks afterward. The gold that built Nevada City, that yellow pudding glittering in Charles Ferguson's sluice box, that iron chest Jack Williams died trying to steal, those ancient river deposits worth $6,000 a day transformed a wilderness into California's third-largest city almost overnight. It created a place where laws were made at gunpoint, where stage runners literally shanghaied passengers, where a lone deputy with a Henry rifle could take down 3 outlaws, and where minors became gentlemen in the presence of respectable women. Nevada City still stands today in the Sierra Nevada foothills, its name predating the state of Nevada by over a decade, a fact residents will passionately explain to anyone who asks. But the real legacy isn't the name. It's the story of what men will do when they see gold thick enough to look like pudding, and the wild, violent, strangely civilized world they built chasing that glittering dream. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.